What do you miss about the pandemic? Story 1. I live in Yosemite National Park. No visitors were allowed in during the initial lockdown, so it was only the employees who lived in the park that got to enjoy spring that year. No one on the mist trail on a fine spring day in May. No cars at Tunnel View for sunrise. No Gumbies at Swan Slab. No careless influencers trampling the meadows. The birds were loud. The bears were comfortable. The dogwood blooms didn't get picked and ruined. I miss that. I miss having the valley to myself. It's so selfish. But man, what an experience. Story 2. I'm surprised I didn't see this near the top, but not getting sick, feeling like anyone cared about my immunosuppression.
I have been on an immunosuppressive drug to control my ankylosing spondylitis since I was 18. I am supposed to skip doses while unwell. During COVID, it was finally normal to take precautions like wearing a medical mask in public and not being forced to attend crowded work meetings where half the people are hacking and coughing. I literally didn't get sick once in 2 years until being forced RTO and then got COVID within 2 weeks. Wouldn't you know, skipping a few doses every 1 to 2 months due to getting sick actually had a huge impact on my quality of life. During COVID, I had 0 flare-ups. While pre- and post-COVID, I've had several scary flare-up episodes, causing weeks of agonizing pain. It was also nice that people pretended to care about immunocompromised folks. My friends would go out of their way to cancel plans if they felt unwell. Just 2 months ago, we were hanging out with some fairly close friends, and 2 hours in, one of them admitted, "Oh, I've had a fever for 3 days, but I thought I could tough it out with Advil." And sure enough, a few days later I got sick.
I totally sympathize with all of the horrible downsides of the pandemic, but it was basically the only time I was able to get an upper hand on my chronic disease and don't feel pressured by society to just suck it up and deal with communicable diseases. Story 3. Nothing.
I was in charge of safety for an essential public service. We were told we weren't allowed to close down, but also got 0 assistance in obtaining PPE, relief workers, childcare, or priority status for vaccinations. I was constantly dealing with angry, irrational members of the public, anxious, depressed, angry coworkers. I had 0 medical or public health training, but I had to write safety protocols and make decisions knowing that if I made a mistake, lots of people might die. Because of staff shortages, I had to do my regular full-time job, plus all the additional work of managing COVID safety, plus take over another department's work normally done by 3 full-time employees. I didn't get paid any extra, but I was told to do all my paperwork at home, which was awful since I shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and literally didn't even have a desk at home. 4 months into lockdown, my cat got cancer and died. Then I had to help evacuate my grandmother and cousins from a wildfire.
Oh, and my doctor retired, so I couldn't get my medication refilled for about a year. Story 4. I miss the feeling of a somewhat shared reality. When most of us, not all, there were of course still anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers, understood and acknowledged the threat this posed, and acted accordingly. Now, because the threat is more long-term damage and disablement than death, and let's be clear, death is still a risk, people can choose to ignore the current reality because they feel like it doesn't impact them anymore, which creates this weird, bizarro world feeling for those of us who understand the ongoing and long-term threat and cannot ignore it.
I have me, CFS. My community is filled with people who were disabled by COVID, many of whom are young, previously healthy people, who have had their lives stripped away from them. I cannot unknow what I know or unsee what I've seen, and watching the majority of people pretend COVID is in the past and no longer a threat fills me with an indescribable feeling of grief and disconnection. Worst of all, people get so angry and defensive when you bring it up. They don't want to know. They want to cling to the illusion that everything is fine, even if it hurts them in the long term.
I am tired. Story 5. Being able to wear a mask in public without being harassed for it. But that's it. I was an essential worker in NYC. Unless you were there, you can never understand. And I wasn't even in healthcare. The people I know who were have never been the same. They've seen crap no one should ever have to, made decisions no one should have to. I have a friend who was widowed in her early 42nd. Nearly every person I know either knows someone who died of COVID or has someone close to them who lost someone to COVID. I have friends still disabled by long COVID they got in. Friends who were in their mid-s and physically fit who had insane breathing issues for years post-infection. I know people who still haven't fiscally recovered due to business loss they suffered in January 21st, 2020.
I miss remembering what it was like in the before times and having hope it would get better. that things would go back to normal and that it would end. I miss having hopes and dreams for my future that COVID made fairly unreachable. I miss my pre-COVID body that was far less chronically unwell than the one I have now.
Also, as a reminder, the pandemic isn't over. Cases are as high as ever. People aren't testing or masking when they're sick. And since there's no longer any comp pay or government subsidies, there's nothing to help stop the spread. Not that people care. Story 6. Other than no income, I loved the shutdown. I loved not feeling obligated to go to social things. I loved not panicking when I had insomnia. Because I wasn't required to keep appointments, I could make up the sleep with no negative consequences. I loved, most of all, the feeling of bonding. People bought from Mom Amp, pop stores and restaurants, money or not, because they wanted to help the other person have an income. I loved artists doing free concerts on YouTube or Facebook, sometimes with band members all signing in from remote locations. I love things like Australians wearing costumes to take out the garbage, or neighborhood karaoke nights from porches, or a few people taking the time to write letters. I loved the sense of humor about it and the memes that went around. I loved televisits with doctors. I loved everyone saying, "Stay safe," instead of goodbye.
I feel like Americans are at their best during a common crisis.
I don't miss the code purples in hospitals. I don't miss the rallies by people who weren't going to let anyone tell them to use common sense that spread and mutated the virus. And selfishly, I don't miss nail salons being closed. Story 7. I don't like telling people, but it was one of the best times of my life. Spent so much time with my family, my kids. We called the first lockdown endless summer because we just hung out with our kids at our parents' pool every day. It was nice, spent time doing family stuff constantly since we were all in the same bubble.
My kids spent so much time with their grandparents, and I know they look back at it fondly now that we and their grandparents have gone back to the fast-paced life of work and school. Lockdown made us feel like people again. We could just casually be alive. We reconnected, and when the lockdowns ended, we went back to normal life, like everyone else. It was an awful time. People died, and a lot of people were scared. The unknowns were terrifying, and people struggled without work. So I feel really badly sometimes about how good it was for us. I think we were just lucky to have not been affected. We live rural outside of a really small town. Crazy to say, but I miss all the time I was spending with my kids. I had a son during COVID, and I spent the entire first 2 years of his life with him every single day. I didn't get that luxury with my other kids.
Overall, I just miss all the free time to spend time with family who also had all the free time to spend with us. Story 8. My grandmother broke her wrist in February. Before the pandemic, I agreed to go and somewhat with her with my son and take care of her. It was a bumpy ride. Dementia is crazy. But it actually got to hear some stories that I did not know about my grandmother's life. Maybe she made them up, I don't know. But I got to spend time with her. Unfortunately, I was an essential employee, and I still had to work. But I will never forget what she did for me or my mother. And my grandmother was the head nurse. She still has people that know her in the industry today. She used to run the ER, and she was absolutely trying to do that at the hospice care that we had to put her in because she was an escape risk. But the pandemic was an opportunity to spend the extra time, but also learn how to keep everything from work outside and not bring it into my house. Story 9. Lockdown came during the last quarter of senior year. I feel selfish saying it was the best time of my life.
My first girlfriend. So we spent almost every day together, and it was in that sweet honeymoon phase where you can't get enough of each other. We worked together, we had the same friends, we did a lot of other stuff.
Couple that with a 6-month summer vacation, and my job was deemed essential, so I was working overtime and making more money than I knew how to spend. There was no curfew because my parents didn't worry about idiots being out around town. I worked at a DQ with a bunch of high school friends. We went out until midnight every night after work. We had no responsibilities, all the money we needed, time, and everyone we knew was a min car ride away. I wish I was bright enough to know how good I had it. Story 10. I lost my job and eventually we lost the best house we ever lived in. I miss it still. But I miss having time with my children. I work so much now. The cost of living went way up in my city since COVID, and as much as we struggled before, we struggle so much more now. I feel like I never see my kids, except when I am getting them ready for bed. I get up at 5 a.m., work my full-time job until 2 p.m., then I'm off again around 2:45, 3:30, work until 6, 7 p.m. Come home, mad dash for dinner, showers, teeth, and bed. I barely spent time with my youngest baby because I had to go straight back to work when she was barely a month old, and I was recovering from major surgery. Sucks. I hate it. I'm sick of living like this, but now it's just so far gone. I feel like I will never be able to slow down again. I miss being a family. I miss being present. I missed out on so much of their childhoods the last few years. It makes me sick. My rent back then was just over.
I paid this month for rent. All I do is work, and I miss being able to breathe. Story 11. I worked all through the pandemic. Everyone else was at home binging their favorite shows, spending time with their friends and family online, gaming. I was giving more of my life to some rich guy so his whores can have trinkets. Nothing changed and my mom died, and I got 3 days off to go out of town to see her dead body one last time. I went downstairs one morning before work to stand in the doorway and listen to the silence. I cried for a while, but then I noticed the smell of grass was so strong. I could smell all the trees which were wet, because it had been raining overnight. The air smelled so sweet without all the fumes from cars. Businesses near me were closed, so I was not smelling their decaying garbage and old food and cigarette butts and dirty parking lots. The air smelled clean and fresh and sweet and grassy. I'll never smell that smell again. Story 12. That the expectation that results, answers, responses, information, etc. should be immediate. I work in construction. Before COVID, there was little to no flex on when bids were due, when materials would ship, arrive on site, when crews would be available, when work would be completed, etc. I would constantly hear threats about liquidated damages for delays, and I was always pressured into unreasonable expectations for turning around change orders, crew schedules, submittals, etc. During the pandemic, everyone suddenly became accommodating and understanding. Oh, your crew is down with COVID. We'll work them in next week. Oh, you can't get a response from the manufacturer on lead times for materials. We'll just circle back and see if you're gotten an update next week. It's already back to normal, with no sympathy or understanding for anything not being exactly as scheduled or turned in exactly when expected. I always work very hard to be responsive and meet my commitments, but some things in construction are always going to be out of my control. It was nice for about months that people understood that I cannot control when someone calls me back, or when they ship material, or when a crew is free and able to mobilize to the job. Story 13. Cheaper gas, social distancing. Some people now act like they're trying to make up for lost time and stand right on top of you in line, it feels like. People being more open to creativity, self-growth, and communicating with each other in innovative ways. I'm unemployed and broke, so my life didn't change much during the pandemic. But it was really cool seeing how people who are used to going out and doing stuff in public were handing being home more often. Seeing people using their free time to explore their interests and find new hobbies, plus sharing those with others online. Or like, even news reporters doing their live segments from home, and you see their cat run across the top of their desk and take a nap on their chair back. I miss stuff like that. Also, the sense of, we're in this together and we'll get through it together, reminded me a lot of how America was right after 9/11. Not the heinous racial nonsense, that stuff was disgusting. But the other response, that the more broad amount of Americans displayed, where it was a bit of fear, mixed with determination to not just survive, but to really thrive as much as possible, to maintain closeness that I don't think we really display in everyday life. Maybe we aspire to it, but it seems like the true humanity only comes out of us in crisis times. Maybe crisis is what it takes to shake some people out of complacency, and helps them realize it's time to be their best self. I wish that was a little more common in everyday America. Story 14. People leaving me alone. People for once seem to be thinking about the fact that they could die, like die in general. I honestly think that a lot of people walk around like, I didn't think I'd ever die, but then there I was. That little bit of humbling human fear made people leave each other alone. Also the fear of catching it from others, so much more mind your own business. And the masks, hold your tears and fears, helped with not seeing facial expressions, prevented stank faces from being detected, prevented judgment from being projected, provided a little more of a barrier to all that stupid human fart cloud and piss elevators and all that nasty crap. I know some rural or suburban people hated the masks, but here in large cities where we had so many dead bodies they had to be stored on boats, a little space for others was a nice break from the humanity every day. Now there's a rise in road rage. the most unnecessary stranger to stranger beef machine. Essentially, I miss everyone shutting up and minding their own business and being humbled. We are now back to the normal they all wanted, and they are all pissed off. Leave the rest of us in peace, cause now I'm mad too. Story 15. I miss the amount of gas I saved because I was WFH. I miss all the great food I was able to make because I had time to learn and experiment. I made the greatest hot lunches every single day. I miss all the time I had to spend with my animals. I miss being able to exercise for minutes at a time. At any point in my day, I was the healthiest and strongest I've ever been considering at work an office job. I miss how people were more concerned with hygiene. I see that we are back to people sneezing in their hands and using public bathrooms and just walking out without even washing their hands. I miss being able to have a garden that I could tend to. In short spurts throughout the day, my garden this year failed dismally. I miss being able to work on household projects that I could take my time with, and instead now have to rush to get things done. I miss being able to take walks outside randomly throughout the day, since I'm not WFH anymore. I miss all the animals in nature. I had no idea that there were so many foxes in my area until the pandemic. I guess the lack of cars on the road gave them an added sense of security. I miss the amount of time I saved traveling for work, groceries, other shopping, since I did so much of it online back then. I miss not having to pay for haircuts. I miss how clean and fresh everything seemed each day with the lack of cars on the road. I really miss not having to use one day a week as a chore day for grocery shopping, laundry, house cleaning. Because during the pandemic, I was able to do all those things in small spurts throughout the week, and my weekends were literally spent doing whatever I felt like.